20 drivers, 10 teams, and the first race of the F1 2024 season. This week I'm chatting all about the Bahrain Grand Prix, so get ready because you've been summoned to the Steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Steward's office. I'm Saira and we have finally had our first race of the 2024 F1 season. Winter break is finally done and over with. We've gone through testing, we've seen the car launches, we've had so much news over winter break anyway, but we finally made it through, come out the other side, and the first race of the season is now done and over with. We have things to unpack after this race. We have a little bit of a better idea of where the teams are in the pecking order. Not a great idea, it's only one track after all, but we've got a better idea about race pace and what the driver's sort of mentality is like with these cars that they're now driving. So let's dive into what's been going on. And if you are new to the podcast for this season, usually when I do a race review, I will cover any news that has come out the paddock over the race week, then go through a little bit of the race weekend and just give the highlights from that, and then kind of go into how each of the teams did. So starting off with the news this week in Formula 1, actually fairly quiet on a whole, but the biggest thing that has been sort of hanging over Formula 1's head for a little bit now are the allegations that came out against Christian Horner. Red Bull, the parent company, Red Bull GmbH, did an internal investigation into these allegations, and on Wednesday of the race week, I think it was, they came out with a formal statement saying that they had concluded the investigation and essentially Christian Horner was cleared of all of the allegations. Now, Red Bull themselves and Christian Horner seem to want to put this to bed now, to rest. They said the investigation is done, he's been cleared, now let's move on. However, some of the team principals, Zach Brown and Toto Wolff, well, Zach Brown isn't a team principal, but you know, they seem to want the FIA and Formula 1 to potentially look in and do an investigation into these allegations against Christian Horner themselves. I think their main point was that it was an internal investigation that was done by Red Bull, it was done behind closed doors, and maybe the FIA and F1 need to do an investigation as well, just to make sure it's just as rigorous and that everything is above board and okay. And then a couple of hours after Red Bull GmbH had released their statement, there was apparently an anonymous email sent to a lot of the journalists in the paddock, all of the team principals in Formula 1, as well as some high-ranking members of the FIA. And the email has a Google Drive which allegedly has screenshots and photos that were used for the investigation about text messages and things like that Christian Horner had sent. Now, Christian Horner has come out and said he once again still denies all of the allegations, investigation is done and it cleared him. But yep, that is currently where we are at with the Christian Horner allegations. Still hanging over, still not fully resolved, I don't think. But yeah, we will wait and see what happens there. I just hope we get to a very swift resolution with this. Now, a piece of news that we had coming out after the race weekend actually was the fact that there are two members of the Alpine team that have apparently resigned. Now, Alpine haven't actually come out and said anything about this. They've not actually formally come out and said that people have resigned. It's just, I think, some of the journalists that have picked up on the story. But yes, Alpine have not had a great start to 2024, as we will go into as we do this race review. But apparently it was their technical director and their head of aero that have resigned. So these aren't exactly small roles. These are very senior members of the Alpine team that want to step away. So yeah, a bit of a headache for Alpine to now sort out, especially so early on in the season. But let's go into what actually happened during this race weekend. Overall, free practices were drama-free, didn't have too many issues crop up. The odd thing here and there, Zhou Guanyu during FP1 said he had some issues with his brakes. FP2, we had a shock with Mercedes being in P1 and P2, which I was not expecting. And then yeah, FP3 just going on as it normally does with practice. So fairly just drama-free, chilled up practice sessions with the drivers, really putting the car into race trim and quality trim at this point. Engines have gone up a little bit more, and yeah, you could see that the drivers were more comfortable with these cars now compared to testing. They were getting used to them a lot more, and I think the teams had also understood their car from all the design that had happened over winter a lot better going into this race weekend. Looking at qualifying though, I mean, we started out with the Ferrari and the Alpines going out on medium tyres, which I wasn't entirely sure why, but you know, they went out, did a lap on those and then came back in. Everyone else did their first lap on the soft tyres like we were expecting them to. And for Alpine, okay, so I had heard a lot of rumours that the Alpine car was bad. It was overweight, the aero design wasn't great, they were going to be back of the field, and I believed that it was going to be a bad car. I believed it because they didn't exactly do much during testing. Apparently Esteban Ocon had told the journalist, I think potentially Will Buxton, that the 2024 car was not going to be great. And just in general, Alpine's trajectory over the last couple of years has not been wonderful. So I was not expecting them to do amazing. However, I did not expect them to be booted out in Q1. It wasn't like they had just not managed to get into Q2 just by, you know, a tenth of a second. No. Alpine, both of their drivers, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, were in P19 and P20. That is how bad that Alpine car is. They were outperformed by Haas, by Sauber, by Williams. That is how much work that Alpine car is going to need, as far as we can tell from Bahrain. Anyway, it was a pretty bad showing from them. There's no other way to say it. It just looked like there was no pace in the car. It was awful in Q1 for them. And apparently it was Baku 2016. That was the last time we saw two cars from the Enstone team be the bottom of the timing sheets during Q1, be the slowest cars during qualifying, which is absolutely insane. They are the team right now that looks like they've taken the biggest step backwards. We also had Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas also kicked out in Q1. Q2 we had Kevin Magnussen, Daniel Ricciardo, Alex Albon, Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda out, and for me Lance Stroll had to be the surprise there. He had been putting in really good qualifying laps beforehand, but yeah, don't exactly know what happened in Q2, whether tyre warm-up wasn't great, whether he made a mistake. But yeah, I think that was a bit of a shock for me because he had shown to have good pace in the Aston Martin. Was a little bit shocked though as well that both of the Haas's had managed to get into Q2. I honestly thought they were going to be a team really on the back foot, kind of where Alpine are, to be honest with you. But qualifying wise, once again, like last year, they look to have pace, and we know that Nico Hülkenberg really extracted a lot out of their car during qualifying, but race day the car let him down, so I shouldn't have been too surprised. But it was nice to see both of them out of Q1. And then to absolutely no one's surprise, Max Verstappen took pole position. I did think for a second it could have been between him and Charles Leclerc, but I mean, Max was completely and utterly at one with the car and took pole position. Charles Leclerc P2, George Russell P3, and that was a really welcome sight for Mercedes fans to see that there was some kind of qualifying pace in the car. However, on the other side of the garage, Lewis Hamilton ended up in P9. Now, he said after qualifying that he had gone in a different direction to George Russell. George went right, he went left, but he thought that the car might be more suited to race day. And we saw this a lot last year as well, where Lewis would tend to gear the car more towards race day than he would quali day. For me, though, when I hear stuff like that, I'm thinking we are once again having a Mercedes car that doesn't have a big enough setup window. The fact that drivers are now having to choose between a setup for race day or quali day, yeah, your setup window still isn't great. The car doesn't have a brilliant balance because you don't hear the likes of Red Bull having to choose setups between a race and quali. Of course, yes, you might gear it a little bit more towards one than the other, but not the way Mercedes tend to say that, yeah, one car's more towards quali day and one car is more towards race day. Going on to a race day, which was on Saturday though, and this has fully messed up the days of the week for me, guys, because yesterday night I was like, oh, I've got to get for work tomorrow. Nope, I'm recording on a Sunday morning because the race was on Saturday. I have to be honest with you guys, I am thoroughly disappointed in the race. We had heard so much throughout testing and even a little bit in free practice sessions, right, that the field looked like it had closed up even more compared to last year. And in my head, I'm always like, okay, even if Red Bull are still very dominant, even if Max is still winning races, maybe we would have closed up more towards him, so we're not getting the massive time gaps anymore. and we will still get a lot of closer racing in the rest of the field, so in midfield and the back of the table, right? So I was excited going into this race, thinking, right, maybe Max will win. Most likely he will. However, it's not going to be by a huge time margin. Hopefully it'll be below 5 seconds. And maybe I was being a bit delusional here. I do understand. Okay, I get it. But I was holding out hope that there was a potential that we would have some smaller gaps to the race win and just in between the cars up and down the field in general. No, we did not get that. We did not get a closer field. If I'm completely honest with you, up and down the field, it looked like the cars were so spread out. There were a lot of times when I was looking at the timesheets during that race where the cars didn't even look like they were within DRS zone. They just weren't. They weren't within a second of each other. And that was up and down the field. At one point I looked and it was only Pierre Gasly right at the back of the grid that was within DRS zone of another car. That was it. Everyone else had over a second between them. So I'm really disappointed that for the opening race of the season, okay, Max won, fair enough, don't have a problem with that, but I barely really saw any good racing up and down the field. And I think that was the more disappointing thing, because even last year when Max was dominating and winning, we were seeing battles throughout the field, and that's what made the races interesting. That's what made me want to carry on watching the race, even when Max was 30 seconds ahead of everyone. Because at least there was a battle going on behind. And it just didn't seem to be the case here. And I think part of what caused some of the issues were the issues that cars were facing. Some of the issues just meant that teams were telling drivers to lift and coast, were telling drivers maybe not to drive so close to the car in front because it was overheating the PU. We had brake issues. So yeah, that wasn't exactly exciting. We also didn't have a single DNF from this race. No DNFs, no safety cars. Bahrain is known for having a 54% chance of a safety car coming out, and we had nothing. All 20 cars managed to finish the race. I'm going to have to pull up my notes again for this though, guys. But yeah, there was a point at the start of the race where I thought we might have some DNFs. Literally right at the beginning, Nico Hülkenberg and Lance Stroll had an issue and an incident right at the start of the race where Lance Stroll's car spun. And yeah, I thought potentially we might have a DNF there. That didn't end up happening. Lance managed to get the car going again. Nico Hülkenberg had front wing damage, went to the pits, got that repaired. That wasn't an issue. Charles had so many lockups at the start of the race that had me slightly confused. And then we heard that there was a temperature imbalance with his brakes and massive issues with his brakes, which meant that, yeah, he just couldn't control the car properly. He couldn't brake where he wanted to. And it meant that I think by lap 10, he went from P2 to P4. And it wasn't that the Ferrari didn't have pace, it was just that, yeah, he could not brake properly and didn't have the confidence in the car. And he was on the radio saying it felt dangerous to be overtaking, attacking, defending, and all of that. So yes, not a great race for Charles Leclerc. We had the Mercedes boys having issues throughout the entire race. There was a point where Lewis was on the radio saying that his battery was at 1%. Apparently it was just because he had used the battery and hadn't charged it. But both of the drivers had issues with their power unit overheating throughout the entire race, which was a little concerning. It did mean that there was a lot of lifting and coasting the drivers had to do, that they couldn't be as racy as they wanted to be. They might have had to hang back from trying to overtake cars as much and being in dirty air because it was going to heat up the PU even more, and they would have ended up having to retire. Both of them ended up being able to finish the race, but yeah, just didn't exactly help their race pace very much. Lewis's seat was also broken midway through the race. He was on the radio to Bono saying that, yep, the seat was broken. And after the race said, yeah, it wasn't exactly comfortable. Alex Albon was also having issues with his power unit overheating. His steering wheel was screaming at him. There was a lot going on there. Same with Logan Sargent, who had a minute or a moment going off track, yelled down the radio, and then managed to get the car going again and get back onto the track. It looked like he almost just couldn't brake going into one of the turns. Looked like he locked up a little bit. So yeah, that wasn't great for him, and it did mean that he ended up falling way behind the pack. So I think he had to pit after that as well. We had Valtteri Bottas having an issue in his pit stop. He was stationary for over 52 seconds because of a wheel nut issue, which was strange that it's happened to him twice now. But yeah, that was a very, very long pit stop for him and basically wrecked his race. Yuki was running really well, pit stops for him. I just think RB had ended up pitting him at the wrong time and that wrecked his race a little bit. We had team orders from RB for Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo at the end of the race, which I didn't fully understand and we will talk about when we get to chatting about each of the teams. But in the end, Max Verstappen did win the Bahrain Grand Prix. We had Sergio Perez in P2 and Carlos Sainz in P3. Max Verstappen won the Bahrain Grand Prix with a 22-second gap to his teammate. Last year, he won with a 12-second gap to Sergio Perez, and he extended that lead by 10 seconds this year. So it's not just the Red Bull car that has managed to find another gear, it is also Max Verstappen, who has just upped his game this year. An incredible performance by him and Red Bull, a 1-2 in the opening race of the season, and a absolutely flawless weekend from Max Verstappen. It's just what we've come to expect of him at this point, let's be honest. But yeah, he took home fastest lap, won the race, 26 points, got the max amount of points this weekend, and is once again leading the championship. Let's dive into all of the teams though, and I'm going to go in my current championship order, which means that yes, of course, Red Bull is at the top with 44 points actually that they managed to take away from this weekend with a P1 and P2 and fastest laps, which I'm pretty sure means that they have the max amount of points a team can take away from a race weekend. But yeah, Max saying that everything was perfect, which it was. Everything worked out really well. Pit stops were good for them. He performed really, really well, so not much else that he could really do to improve. Checo Perez said that he is happy, but there's work to improve, and I would agree. To finish 22 seconds behind your teammate in the exact same car is not great, let's be honest. It's not the best show of your skill set in a year where you are going to end up losing your seat. So definitely work that needs to be done by Sergio Perez there throughout the season. Once again, it is only the opening race, but yeah, I know he was starting further behind than Max Verstappen. I know that he had some more overtakes he needed to do to get into P2, and great that he got it, but 22 seconds when you have free air to be able to try and catch up. To not do that, I don't know. We'll see how the rest of the season goes for him. Ferrari are up next, and yes, it was a bit of a mixed bag for them this weekend, especially on the Sunday, I would say. Carlos Sainz had an absolutely fantastic race. I mean, he finished in P3, had some absolutely amazing overtakes, both on his teammate Charles Leclerc and also the other drivers that were around him. He said in his interview that he had wanted a car that would attack and overtake. Didn't get that last year. Last year was a lot of defending and feeling like he was falling behind, but he feels like he has that car now this year. So really, really good show from him. Really enjoyed watching his overtakes. Other side of the garage for Ferrari though was Charles Leclerc, who had a miserable Sunday, to be honest with you, and I don't blame him. He did not have the confidence in his car, and when you're seeing that the car is slightly dangerous to drive because the braking isn't working properly, yeah, I get it. You're not going to be enjoying it. Still a decent result from him. However, yeah, not the best race weekend for him, and an issue that really, really needs to be sorted out before they head out to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix next week. I do think, though, that the Ferrari tyre wear and race pace looked a lot better when we look at especially Carlos Sainz. It seems like some of the issues that they had last year were getting sorted out in this car, and yeah, race pace just looked a lot better. Mercedes, I mean, George was very racy at the start, took P2 from Charles Leclerc very, very early on, looked very aggressive, and then, yeah, he said it just fell away very quickly because the PU was overheating, and he just wasn't able to attack anymore. There was a lot of lifting and coasting going on for both of the drivers, and it just meant that he ended up falling down to P5 by the end of the race. Still a decent result, but yeah, it is gutting when you have such a good race start. Lewis Hamilton did not seem very happy. I think the issues plaguing him with both his seat and the PU just also led to a very unhappy race for him. The power unit though, and the cooling issue, I know some people were concerned it was an actual issue with the power unit. I was slightly concerned that the overheating might have been the way they had packaged the power unit this year, because they've changed a lot on that car. But apparently it was actually just down to the fact that they had gotten the setup wrong with the weather. The way that they had forecast the weather and changed the setup and the cooling because of that wasn't correct. But to have cooling issues that early on in the race means you must have gotten it very, very wrong. So definitely something that Mercedes need to look into, because mistakes like that are costing your drivers. George was saying it was about half a second a lap it was costing them. I read somewhere else it's about 4/10, but regardless of whether it's 4/10 or half a second or even a tenth, those are what you need in Formula One. Those are what help you with overtakes. So definitely something Mercedes need to look at and remedy, and mistakes like that can't keep being made this season. Fourth in the constructors right now is McLaren. Now, Lando Norris said that he was glad that they were close to Mercedes, but Ferrari seemed quite far off their race pace still, and Red Bull definitely seem far off. Oscar said that there were good and bad moments in this race, but he thinks they were where they expected to be, which sounds good, right? At least that in your data and what you're doing on tracks, what you've predicted is going to happen, and what's going on track is correlating. So that's actually quite good news, I think. For both of their drivers and for Zach Brown and the team itself, they probably are going to be gutted that they just weren't able to make that step forward that they wanted to Red Bull over winter break. However, I've got a feeling they're still working very hard behind the scenes, and you don't know with McLaren. We saw what happened when they brought an upgrades package last year. They might just shoot up the field with another upgrade package, maybe not, but they are in a much, much better place than when they started the season last year, and that's amazing. Bahrain normally isn't a good track for them. I know that the next two races their drivers were saying are more suited to them traditionally, so we'll see what happens there, especially with Mercedes potentially sorting out the cooling issues. We'll see if both of them are still on par with each other or whether one is beating out the other. After that came Aston Martin. I would say it's a little bit of a disappointing race for them. However, Fernando Alonso said, really, what's happened is that they've stayed in the same sort of place they were in after Abu Dhabi last year. 5th fastest team, which is where they were at the end of 2023. Consistency is good, though. I mean, it's not falling behind. Sure, you're not making massive amounts of improvements to get the field, but at least you haven't fallen behind like Alpine. Lance Stroll was saying that he was gutted that he had that first lap incident, but it was really satisfying then to push himself up in the points, because he was very, very far behind the field at one point, and he did manage to get into the top 10 by the end of the race. Kick Sauber, I was not expecting them to be 6th, but Joe was super happy with the progress the team had made over the weekend. Looks like they're doing a lot of learning. Valtteri Bottas is just gutted that the wheel nut had caused him to basically fall behind the pack and wreck his race. Then came Haas in 7th place, and drivers weren't happy. Neither of them were very happy. No points for the team, and Magnussen was saying that tyre drag is better, which is good. That was something that was really hurting them last season, but the race pace isn't exactly any better. And with Nico Hülkenberg, he said he's disappointed, frustrated, the race was just bad, and I think a lot of that came from the fact that he needed to end up having his front wing changed, which caused him to lose a lot of time and a lot of progress, especially when he was a Haas driver that qualified very high up. He was in P10, got into Q3, so disappointing that obviously that first lap incident just shuffled him right back down the field. Racing Bulls, VCARB, RB, they had team orders going on right at the end of the race. Yuki Tsunoda was on the gearbox of Kevin Magnussen. Bear in mind, this was not for a point at all. There was no championship point on the line. They asked Yuki to swap over with Daniel, who was just behind him. Swapped over. Daniel was not able to overtake on Kevin Magnussen, and usually what we see at this point, right, when a teammate has given you a place, when you haven't overtaken them in a racing condition, and if you've not been able to overtake the car ahead like the team wanted to, by the end of the race, the teams swap around the drivers, because rightfully that would be Yuki's place. He gave it up to Daniel. VCARB didn't end up doing this with their drivers, and yes, Yuki sort of made a dive on Daniel in the sort of closing lap of the race. Not closing lap, it was a cool down lap, sorry. And yes, not the best move to make, a little bit silly to do. However, I really just want to know what VCARB's thinking was here. There was no championship point on the line. What were you going to do by getting a driver to try and overtake Kevin Magnussen? And okay, yes, sometimes places count when you don't get points, fair enough, but Daniel wasn't able to overtake at the end, so why weren't we swapping Yuki Tsunoda with Daniel? I'm not sure whether there is favouritism of Daniel Ricciardo going on there so he can try and get the Red Bull seat for next season. That is one of the theories being floated around right now. But yes, I'm looking at Laurent Mekies, and as a team principal, that is something that he needs to figure out with his drivers now, because I personally don't think what happened was right at the end of that race. In ninth place came Williams, which I'm disappointed about, but massive issues with them with their PU. Alex said he was fighting issues electronically. There were alarms going off on their steering wheel. The car was overheating, which wrecked his race. Logan Sargent also really not happy with what happened. He had issues in qualifying and the race, and then said that issue that he had in qualifying wasn't sorted out for the race, it just carried on. So they need to investigate that and figure out why that issue wasn't solved. So I do wonder whether when that issue was solved, if it had been solved before quali, if he would have qualified higher up, gotten out of Q1, and whether the race would have gone better. And then finally came Alpine in 10th place. Their drivers had a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. No points scored, finishing bottom of the table behind Haas, Sauber, behind RB, behind Williams. Alpine are in 10th place right now. Their drivers aren't happy. To be honest, actually, Esteban Ocon is weirdly trying to be very positive about Alpine. He keeps saying it's one of the first races of the season. He believes in the team, which is great. You want to keep team morale up. However, kind of surprised that he's not more vocal about being unhappy with Alpine right now. But he is disappointed. That he is. He's not happy that they aren't competing further up the field. Pierre Gasly is not happy. And for Pierre in particular, to move away from, I was going to call them Toro Rosso, and it was AlphaTauri when he was there. But to move away from AlphaTauri into Alpine, hoping it's a more competitive car further up the field. You see V-Carb now, who are a little bit more competitive, a little bit racier than what Alpine are. It's going to be disappointing. Esteban thinks that Saudi will be a better track for them. Going out to Jeddah, it will be better. It'll be more suited towards their car. I will wait and see. I will not say anything about that until we get to Saudi, but I am hesitant as to whether or not they will manage to score points. Carlos Sainz was your driver of the day, and he was also my driver of the day. It was overall a fairly quiet race. However, the overtakes he was doing were incredible, and he just seemed so happy coming out of the car and, claiming that P3 position. So yeah, he is also my driver of the day. And that was the Bahrain Grand Prix in a nutshell. Wasn't the most exciting seasoning opener. Wasn't one of the races that I think a lot of us will remember from this season. And the opening race is normally one where there are a lot of moments that we remember. But this one, was quite dull up and down the field. It wasn't just Max dominating with everyone. It was a really quiet race. Here's to hoping that Saudi in a couple of days' time now will be a little bit more exciting. I'm really hoping so. I just want some closer battles up and down the field, but we'll see what goes on there. I will be back next Tuesday at 9 a.m, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. We will run through everything that happened, hopefully a little bit more on-track action. But we'll wait and see. Thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch yn fawr. Make sure you follow me on Instagram and TikTok at stewards_office, where I post a load about F1 and just motorsport in general. And I'll see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Stewards office.